In this lecture, we're going to be talking about memories and neuroplasticity. The purpose of this lecture is to help you understand how memories are formed, how they are different, how to control, replace, and eliminate some memories, and see if it's even possible. Now, we all know that memories affect us on a daily basis. Our past memories affect us till this day. When a person fosters a certain experience, whether it's good or bad, positive or negative, this experience will eventually turn into a memory. We can write texts because of our memory. We can read because we memorized the alphabets and we memorized how it works. In a nutshell, we function as the sum of our memories. And of course, growing up, each and every event that turns into a memory has a certain influence on the way we perceive situations and how we handle them. So when something negative happens and it turns into a memory, it is usually associated with negative feelings and thoughts. And as our human nature, we want to always avoid pain and negative thoughts. We refer back to our memories to avoid these situations happening again. And on the other hand, when there's a positive experience, it is usually associated with good memories, good feelings, good thoughts. And that's exactly why we act in different ways depending on the situations and how our memory is associated with it. You will either feel that you're uncomfortable or you will feel that you're happy and joyful. And of course, this can all be traced to our neurological system. Now, of course, there are still a lot of questions that remain unanswered when it comes to memory and recalling. But generally speaking, the storage capacity of the human brain is virtually limitless, where an average adult can memorize up to 100,000 words and even more. The more you age, the more your vocabulary will increase, the more it will develop. So when people think that the older you get, the less memory you have and the more your memory is affected in a negative way, in fact, this is not true at all. The reason why when people get older, their memory gets weaker is because the older they get, the less they train their brain muscle, the less new experiences they have, the less information and knowledge they try to absorb, because they kind of know everything at this point and they don't have the energy to explore more things. And when you don't train your muscle, it will get weaker. However, when you use this muscle and you improve it, you learn more, you stimulate your brain more, physical changes in your brain structure can occur. Researchers through MRI found that the brain structure will be different before and after learning processes. And lastly, there is no main center. Of course, when we talk about scientific approach, we're going to focus on some parts of the brain more than others, but memories are scattered all around our brain. They're all over the place. So, in order to understand your memory more, you need to understand the fundamentals that comes from the scientific approach. Memory is the reactivation of a specific group of neurons formed from persistent changes in the strength of connections between neurons. As I'm saying it, and as you can read it, you can simply figure out that it is exactly what we talk about when we talk about neuroplasticity. It is the same process. Strength and connection between neurons form memories, and the reactivation of these memories and how well you remember these memories depend on the strength of the connection or link between the neurons. And every memory has a certain neural network or neural structure that is formed by the combination of all these neurons associated with this experience that turned into a memory. But there's a lot more to it than just persistent changes in the strength of connection between neurons. Memories don't always just depend on consistency and repetition. You eat every single day, but you probably can't remember what you had for lunch 3 days ago. Unless it was something out of this world that was associated with a lot of emotions, unless you ate the best chicken wings you've ever had, you will most probably not associate it with any kind of memory in the long term. But when you have a certain experience that do turn into memory, neurons will start to communicate through synaptic connections, through, of course, chemical structures and neurotransmitters. And the stronger the link, the better, the more you'll be able to recall this memory. If your first relationship was a disaster and your heart was broken, you will always be cynical when it comes to relationships, and this memory will definitely affect you. But as time passes by, you start forgetting about this. And it always gets better with time. You don't remember it as much. Sometimes you barely even remember it for months. But then another relationship comes along and the same thing happens. And again, it's going to take you some time to forget about it. And let's just say it happened a third time and the same thing happens. And at this point, you're always thinking that your partner is the problem. But what if we pause for a second and think about, what if you're the problem? What if those past experiences with different partners that led to you being hurt were stored in terms of memories? And as they're bad memories that got you a lot of bad feelings, your brain wants to avoid them. So every time you're in a relationship and you feel like you're not really in control of the situation, your brain will start acting in a way to remove this trigger. Your mind will associate relationships as a trigger that is linked to bad emotions and you being hurt. And of course, this is not on the conscious level. You're not aware of this. It's in the subconscious level, and that's exactly why it can be detrimental. But of course, when also you have a lot of repetition, especially when it comes to motor skills, you're usually more likely to develop a good memory. And we're talking about a case where there's a lot of consistency. When a person starts learning the guitar at first, they need to keep looking at their fingers and keep looking at their pick. But after a year of practice, they can play anything without even looking at the guitar, without even looking at the pick. When you're first learning how to play basketball and you're dribbling, you're always looking at the ball. But then after 6 months, you find yourself that you're moving around, dribbling the ball without even looking at it. And it's because the link between neurons that form this neural structure linked to this certain behavior, experience, or whatever you're doing gets stronger, your memory gets stronger, and that's why your recalling becomes way, way better. So synaptic plasticity allows the reactivation of a specific combination of neurons over other combinations of neurons. Synapses defines the strength of brain cells' connections. These connections can be made stronger or weaker depending on when and how often they have been activated in the past. And active connections tend to get stronger, whereas those that aren't used to get weaker and can eventually disappear entirely. When you have a test the next day, and one day before you memorize 20 pages, you might remember 50-60% of them the next day, but then after a week, you can probably remember no more than 1% of the information you memorized. But when you spend the entire semester following up, and every single time you finish a lesson, you go back to it again and again, and you started studying for this test 2 weeks before, and you went through these 20 pages over and over and over again, it's not just that you will remember more when you're taking the test, but after 1 week, you'll remember way, way more than the other person who studied one night before. But is it as simple as just repeating something over and over and over again to form a memory out of it? Well, what about your first kiss? It was a one-time experience and it's stuck in your memory till this day. What about when you graduated and you got your diploma? It only happened once, but it's stuck in your mind till this day. What about that time when you had a fight with a friend? These were not recurring. It was just a one-time experience. So how come you still remember these experiences even if it was years ago and it only happened once? So of course, the question we're trying to ask is, what makes a memory stronger? One thing that helps make a memory robust is if it has strong emotional content. You probably still remember, as we said, your first kiss or where you were when you found out that a close family member had passed away. You can remember details, how it felt, what happened, how people reacted, the environment that was around you, and even how you felt afterwards, and not just at the moment of the experience or when the memory happened. Over the course, as we talked more and more about neuroplasticity, we found out that emotions have the strongest link to neuroplasticity. Emotions have this amazing ability to change the brain like nothing else. One single experience as a kid can change your entire perspective for a lifetime when it comes to a certain situation. And it is all because of the emotions associated with it. So memories are not just about consistency and persistence and doing it over and over and over again. It is also about the emotional connection and the emotional content related to it. But it doesn't stop there, because there's not only one type of memory. There are actually different types of memories, and each and every one of them is linked to another situation and another perception and another analysis. But now, you're probably asking yourself, why? Why do emotions have such a strong link with our memories and our brain plasticity? What's so special about emotions that they can actually change the entire brain structure? Well, this happens because of the amygdala, which brain imaging studies have shown is activated by emotional events. The amygdala boosts memory encoding by enhancing attention and perception, and can help memory retention by triggering the release of stress hormones such as adrenaline and cortisol to boost arousal. And what this amygdala does is that it has a primarily role in when it comes to forming and storing these memories that are associated with emotional events. And the correlation between these events and your memory depends on how severe or how intense the emotional situation is. The stronger the emotions, the bigger the stimuli when it comes to the amygdala being triggered. And these emotions will increase interaction between neocortical storage sites, which can promote synaptic plasticity, therefore neuroplasticity. So when we talk about stressful situations, while memories of a stressful event can be enhanced, stress tends to have negative effects on memory storage for events that coincide with but are not the direct cause of the stress. Stress also alters the way that our brain processes information, changing from a flexible, holistic approach to more rigid stimulus response associations. This can change the nature of the memory stored as well as what we recall under stress. So stressful situations, even though they are linked to a lot of emotions, can actually affect your memory in a negative way. Let's take an example. You have an exam coming in the next 2 days and you haven't studied anything yet. And as soon as you realize that your exam is in 2 days, you will start stressing out. Especially if you're the kind of students who always maintain high grades, the stress levels will be higher. But let's take another example of somebody who is used to doing this. Somebody who would always study the last minute, who would always study 2 days before the exam. He's used to it. And maybe adding the factor that this person doesn't always get high grades. The stress levels are definitely going to be lower than the first example. And that's why people with less stress, people who are used to studying 2 days before the exam, will perform better than people who are not used to studying 2 days before the exam, who will stress out and try to study everything before the exam. So not only does stress affect our memory, but also the intensity of stress can play a crucial role when it comes to the memory loss. Now, understanding the basic fundamentals of memory is one thing, But knowing the different types of memories is an entirely different situation because, as we said before, there are different types of memories and each and every one of them has particular traits to it. Starting with the sensory memory, it holds information coming in through the senses for a period ranging from a fraction of a second to several seconds. These memories formed through our senses, our sight, hearing, taste, smell, and touch. They are usually short-termed and the memory don't last for a long time. Try listening to a new song that you've never heard before, and at one point you would just pause and try to remember what words the artist used 15 seconds ago. Now you probably won't be able to remember what he said, but if you want to remember what he said 1 second before you paused, it's going to be much easier. But there is one exception. If the song you're listening to had such a strong emotional effect on you that you felt every single word the artist was saying, as if it was your own personal experience, a lot of times you hear a song and you're like, this song is about me. In this case, you might be able to remember what he said for a longer period of time. Moving on to the short-term memory. It holds information we are actively thinking about for about 7 items for no more than 20 or 30 seconds at a time without rehearsal. It's basically the information we are currently aware of or thinking about. And this information is either stored and moved to the long-term memory, or you would just forget about it, but it will always be existent in your mind somewhere, somehow, and something can always trigger it back, but it's not that simple. However, long-term memory holds information for a long period of time, almost permanently, with a virtually unlimited capacity. Now, when we talk about long-term memory, we talk about 2 different types of memories, implicit and explicit memory. Implicit memory is information that is remembered unconsciously and effortlessly. How to drive your car, how to drive back from work all the way back to your house, how to write your name. But explicit memory is conscious, intentional remembering of information. You trying to remember what you read in the textbook. You trying to remember what your boss told you about work ethic. You trying to remember the best lesson you've ever learned from your father or your mother or your brother. So one of them needs conscious attention and the other doesn't. And of course, both of them will fall under the category of long-term memory. Moving on, we have the declarative memory, which is recall of factual information such as dates, words, faces, events, and concepts. And we have procedural memory, which is recalling of how to perform an action, task, or skill. So when you remember that the capital of Canada is Ottawa, you are using your declarative memory. And this type of memory is usually involved and associated with conscious remembering and not unconscious remembering, because you can't unconsciously remember dates, words, faces, events, and concepts. You have to think about it in order to remember it. And procedural memory is always linked to, as we said, action, task, or skill. How to ride a bike, how to change water filters. And usually, procedural memory is considered as implicit and not explicit because you don't have to consciously remember how to do certain skill or action. When you know how to ride a bike and you want to ride a bike, you just do it. You don't think about what you're doing, but you just do it. And lastly, semantic memory and episodic memory. Semantic memory is a recall of general facts, whereas episodic memory is a recall of personal experiences. So knowing that basketball is a sport, or knowing that water is good for your health, you are remembering general information which is linked to your semantic memory. But when you remember what happened during a basketball game and it's a personal experience, then you're talking about episodic memory.